But first up, let's get back to coronavirus and the vaccine. More problems in the EU. Authorities in Germany and France are under pressure to come up with creative solutions to shift the AstraZeneca vaccine at higher speed in order to avoid a pile-up of unused doses over the coming weeks. On Monday, France's medical regulator reversed its advice not to use the AstraZeneca jab on over 65s, and Germany's vaccination committee is coming under increased pressure to follow suit or even scrap prioritisation altogether. I spoke to a writer at the German Bild magazine earlier who said that over 1 million doses of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine are sitting in refrigerators unused and gathering dust. In the western German city of Duisburg, for example, a spokesperson said that up to 70% of appointments for an injection with the AstraZeneca jab had either not been taken up or cancelled. Extraordinary stuff. Let's get the reaction now of Conservative MP for Wokingham, Sir John Redwood. Sir John, welcome to the show.
Yes, hello.
This is a debacle, and it would be funny if it wasn't so tragic, because this will potentially cost lives.
Well, I think it's very sad for the people who could benefit from the vaccine, and I think it shows that playing politics with the vaccine as they did a couple of months ago, first of all complaining they weren't getting enough of the vaccine from the UK, and then allowing it to get across that they didn't think it will work for older people, has produced a lethal response, hasn't it? Because the UK has been entirely decent. Quite large quantities of vaccine have obviously now been supplied to the European Union countries. And we now see both France and Germany struggling to get the vaccines out and accepted after the things that some of their politicians have said.
It seems this all began with the remarks of Emmanuel Macron, the French president, which could only be described, Sir John, at this stage as misinformation about the Oxford jab.
Yes, well, I mean, I don't want to criticise President of France. That's for the French voters to do if they see fit. But it does appear that ultra caution by the regulators and difficult statements by Mrs. Merkel and by Mr. Macron combine to put people off in France and Germany from this vaccine. And so now they've got this paradox that they've got plenty of supplies and people don't want it. And they've got this problem that they're way behind on vaccination rates when it does appear from all the testing that's been done in the UK, America, Israel and so forth, that if you roll out vaccines quickly, you do protect a lot of people.
And would you say that the remarks and the false information around the Oxford AstraZeneca jab is an example of post-Brexit Britain bashing?
Well, again, I don't want to start throwing allegations around. They have done damage. They've got to sort out the damage they have done. I think it's a great pity that they said what they did. And, I feel sorry for people in France and Germany that they have now been put off something which looks as if it could help them. And there's a strange attitude, isn't there, in the French and German media now that they've both picked up the worries that they earlier expressed about Astra. And now are also saying, but we're now way behind the UK and the US and Israel in vaccinating people, and it does look as if these vaccines are working.
Would you say this is a failure of individual politicians on the continent, or a reflection of the ultimate cultural problems and the logistical issues within the EU?
Well, I think this was primarily an EU failure. It obviously wasn't made any easier by some of the statements of Mrs. Merkel and Mr. Macron, but it began as an EU failure because the EU decided that they would organise vaccine purchasing and vaccine distribution for EU member states, and I think they pushed back on individual member states who wanted to do their own thing. And then they didn't do a very good job at it, and it was difficult, and you had to guess which vaccines were going to get earliest approval and which vaccines are going to be successful, because when the UK started buying vaccines, none of them were regulated and you didn't know which ones were going to work. And the EU didn't show enough adventure and enterprise in buying enough vaccines that might work, and so they were left in some difficulties. And then they had a regulatory system which delayed giving approval to vaccines which were meeting with approval elsewhere, and that was a problem as well.
Is this the kind of bureaucratic gridlock that always motivated you to get us out of the European Union?
Well, it was part of it, yes. And I was single market minister for a bit at the time when they were doing what they call completing the single market. And I was shocked by how they interpreted a market. They thought a market was about a massive set of law codes with fines and penalties and telling people how they were to do things, whereas I thought a market was about a sensible legal structure allowing people to buy and sell, innovate, invest, and do different things. But it was much more restrictive than that in the EU.
John, you're one of the most experienced politicians in the country, and you'll have witnessed many, many budgets. Big pressure on the Chancellor tomorrow, perhaps the most important budget in recent political history. What do you think the focus of tomorrow's budget should be? Should it be repair, the balancing of the books, the tackling of that enormous national debt, or stimulating recovery?
I think it's the easiest budget of all to advise him on. You must just go for growth. You must do everything to make it easier for the self-employed to build up their businesses again, for the small businesses to start functioning again, to get people through the debt burden they've taken on during the difficult days of lockdown, affecting about a quarter of the economy. And I don't think your two options are contrasts that you have to choose between. I think the only way you can get the deficit down, because it is so huge, is growth. Why do we have a colossal deficit? It's because expenditure has shot up to make up for people not having incomes or profits in their businesses. And revenues have collapsed because there aren't earnings and profits in sufficient quantity to tax. So what is the remedy? The remedy must be to get everybody back into well-paid jobs that you can, and get every business back trading that you can, making some profit, and then you'll find the deficit will disappear.
Well, I think go for growth could be a really excellent and apposite catchphrase. A good follow-up to get Brexit done is go for growth. However, you're at odds with your former leader, William Hague, who has written in the Times newspaper suggesting that actually taxes must rise and that this debt is not something we should get used to having.
Well, he's wrong. And if you've suddenly put up tax rates now, you might end up collecting less money. There are an awful lot of businesses that are on the edge. There are quite a lot of small businesses and entrepreneurs who, if we made it too difficult for them, would say, oh, I'm going to take early retirement, or I'm going to look around for an easier job. I'm not going to carry on doing this. It's just too difficult. You've got to make it as easy as possible for the marginal businesses and the slightly reluctant self-employed people wondering about it to go back to work with a will and think, this is worthwhile, the government's behind me, I can keep a reasonable amount of money that I earn or make in my business. That's what we need. We need a generous government, and then it will have a bigger tax base and there'll be more revenue. How did we get the deficit down in the previous decade? Well, if you look at the figures, it came from a massive increase in tax revenue, and the increase in tax revenue from businesses took place against the background of actually cutting the tax rate on them. It showed that going for growth worked.
Sir John, thank you very much for your time and for coining that catchphrase, go for growth.